Good Monday morning. Hey, everybody. This is Jeremy coming at you once again with Redtired Podcast, and we're coming at you with a very special Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. So, Jacob, Happy Veterans Day, my friend. How are you?
Good. Happy Veterans Day, man. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service, my friend. I'm glad you came back alive.
Yes. Not a lot of us did.
Not a lot. That's right. And in fact, I sent you a picture not too terribly long ago that I found. It was a picture of me and you, much younger.
And skinnier.
And much skinnier. And I had a little bit more hair, not much, but a little bit more hair. But this was from our last tour when you and I were both coming home together. We sat next to each other on the flight.
Yep.
I had totally forgotten about that. So getting that picture and sending it to you, that was a real big treat for me.
Yeah, it was crazy. We should put that on our logo.
Yeah, look at these two little punks.
Yeah, what a great day. Times are changing, but some people still appreciate everything that we've done, which is grateful. So it's awesome. I appreciate you thinking of the idea of actually doing an episode because it didn't even dawn on me, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really think about it being Veterans Day until I think it was Friday. I was scrolling through my Facebook feed to see who was doing what or what's going on in the world. And somebody had posted a really funny meme about, hey, Veterans Day is coming up. Make sure that you change your profile picture to you in uniform so that everybody can say thank you and you can go get your free meal at Applebee's. And it's funny because we laugh about it because it's almost like, hey, look at me. And a lot of us are just not like that. We don't like the whole, hey, look at me attitude.
Yeah.
I don't, in fact, every year, every veteran comes out of the woodwork and they go get their free meal at Applebee's or Chili's or whatever. I just don't. I don't feel that it's necessary. I'm a big boy. I can pay for my own chicken fingers. And as much as I appreciate the sentiment that these companies put out there and thanking the veterans, because some of us really do need that affirmation, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want to wait in line. Yeah.
Well, it's crazy, Veterans Day has been around for a very long time, and so it's great that that our government decided to make it official, because I know it was just a kind of like a day to be thankful. Back in 1919, I think is when they did it, but I'm glad back in 1938 that they actually decided to turn it into a national holiday to kind of give the nation a time of pause and be like, hey, use this time to thank either your family member, because I know now these days a lot of veterans are older veterans that fought in Desert Storm. I think there's still a few around for Vietnam, Korean War, because I know, man, time's flying, and it sucks when I read news articles come up last surviving member of Iwo Jima just recently passed away, just past Friday. So I was like, golly, I remember when I was younger, it was plentiful, to go around and thank every single individual. So
certainly. And I think that the gratitude means a lot more to different generations. So there's a story I'm going to cover today on the Vietnam veterans. And, so there's something that just really stood out to me when I came home from Iraq. The people that were there for me the most were veterans from the Vietnam era, guys who'd actually served in Vietnam. They were the ones that helped me to navigate the VA and learn how everything works on the outside, and taught me to be persistent when it came to getting the care that I needed because of certain issues that I've experienced in the military, where I came home broken. I came home a different person. And had it not been for the Vietnam era veterans who walked out on Washington and marched and protested and actually stood up for what they were due, for the healthcare and the benefits that they were due, had they not done that, or had they not stepped up to help our generation, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Oh yeah, I'd be homeless.
I don't know if I'd be homeless, but I'd certainly be working a lot harder on things that I really don't enjoy.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little history on where Veterans Day came from
Let's
before
do
we
it.
jump into these articles. So Veterans Day was originated as Amnesty Day on November 11th, 1990. That was the first anniversary right after World War One, and then Congress passed a resolution in 1926 for an annual observance. So and later down the years, then November 11th became a national holiday, which I think originated in 1938. So unlike Memorial Day, Veterans Day pays tribute to all American veterans, living or dead, but especially gives thanks to living veterans who served their country honorably during the war or peacetime. Sorry. So there you have it. In 1954, though, President Dwight D. Eisenhower officially changed the name of the holiday from Amnesty Day to Veterans Day. So it was Amnesty Day for a very long time. So that's pretty neat because I did not know that.
I like the fact that that you addressed one particular subject was the Veterans Day being I don't remember the direct quote that you said, but it was intended for those who had gone to overseas to serve in conflicts or something somewhere in that along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I can really appreciate that because listen, I'll never degrade somebody for not having deployed. I can't pick on people just because they didn't get a deployment in their career. But somebody I will call out is somebody who didn't even successfully serve their term, or somebody like, well, I was in basic training, so I'm basically a veteran. That's like the MP saying I'm basically infantry. I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I'll never degrade anybody for at least going and trying, but hey, listen, if you're one of those guys that you tried to serve and you couldn't quite hack it, you couldn't even make it past like the first couple of years or anything like that, like don't try to own this, because you can always tell, you can always smell one of those guys that he's just kind of BSing his way through it. Like don't try to take away from other people's services by lumping yourself in there if you've done nothing.
Yeah.
And if you've been medically removed, or you served your time honorably but you didn't deploy, that's fine. Hey, you're still a veteran in my book. You did what you signed up to do. You survived through the contract, and you served, but deployment just didn't come your way. That's fine. You're still a veteran to me.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no major delineation between a combat veteran and a regular veteran, other than that one guy who just couldn't hack it through basic training. Like, forget that guy. But the rest of us, or the rest of you guys, hey, you guys are awesome. My hat's off to you.
Yeah. Well, that being said, here are some facts about veteran population of the United States. So there's 18.2 million living veterans served during at least one war as of 2018. So that's pretty crazy. So 9% of those veterans are women. 7 million veterans served during the Vietnam War. 3 million veterans served in support of the war of terrorism, the global war on terrorism. And over 16 million Americans who served in World War II. About 496,000 were still alive as of 2018.
Wow.
Yeah. Connecticut was the home of the highest percentage of people who served during World War II, which was 7.1%.
Go Connecticut. I've been
Yeah.
bad mouthing them far too much, maybe.
2 million veterans served during the Korean War, which is the forgotten war. A lot of people tend to forget about that one. And as of 2017, the top 3 states with the highest percentage of veterans who serve is Alaska, Maine, and Montana.
What was that last one?
Montana.
Montana. Okay.
Yeah.
It may have been some kind of a glitch in the matrix there. I didn't understand, but yeah, Montana. Okay. Well,
there you have it on some crazy facts there. That's pretty neat. I didn't know that the percentage was so high for women. I didn't know it was 9. To be honest, I would say 5, but 9%, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's women out there that'll do the damn thing just right alongside of them. We still have that thing now where women are actually allowed into combat arms, and so if you're a woman and you can actually hack it in combat arms, like if you're a woman in the infantry and you can actually hack it, wow, color me impressed.
That's awesome.
Because there's so few of them that are actually able to do that.
Well, there you have it on my little brief of fun facts and history there of Veterans Day.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about since today being Veterans Day. There's some really cool historical things that I pulled off directly off of history.com. And they're more stories than they are, news media, blah, blah, blah. We're just not going to do that today. We want to keep it positive. We want to keep it joyous. We want to, this is all about the vets today. So we're going to go into those, and we're going to talk about a couple of things. So one of the things we talked about earlier was, and oh, by the way, Mike, they're in the description below. You're welcome. One of the things that we talked about earlier, just a few minutes ago, was the Vietnam era. And some people may not be aware of this, but the Vietnam veterans, hey, they didn't get a parade when they came home. They didn't get the happy, greeting, the warm greeting, the everybody cheering for them and applauding them. They didn't get that. That like the World War II guys, I think they got it. I know our generation got it because they made it a really, really big deal at Fort Hood, lining up outside of Stryker Gym, and they had a DJ and everything, and all sorts of people. I mean, the random people that were there at the airport just clapping for us when we came home, had no idea who those people were, scared us half to death, not knowing that there was going to be a bunch of people there cheering for us.
Yeah.
Vietnam didn't get that. And it's kind of it's one of those, I don't know, I want to say it's a splotch on the fabric of American history, but it is. They were treated horribly because the media blew a lot. In fact, I'm going to just go ahead and go into the story. And it's a history.com. Why were Vietnam veterans treated poorly when they returned? American soldiers returning home from Vietnam often faced scorn as the war that they had fought in became increasingly unpopular. 21-year-old Stephen A. Walk arrived as an infantryman in the Army's 1st Cavalry Division in Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam in early January 1969 to fighting an escalating and increasingly unwinnable war. By June, Walk had been wounded twice, the second time seriously, and was sent back to the United States for treatment in Boston's Chelsea Naval Hospital. It was after returning to the U.S. and while en route to the hospital that Walk first encountered hostility as a veteran. Strapped to a gurney in a retrofitted bus, Walk and other wounded servicemen felt excitement as being back on American soil. But looking out the window and seeing civilians stop to watch a small convoy of hospital-bound vehicles, his excitement turned to confusion. Walk said, "I remember feeling like, what could I do to acknowledge them? And I just gave them the peace sign. And instead of getting the returning peace sign from the crowd, I got middle fingers." The Vietnam War claimed the lives of more than 58,000 American service members and wounded more than 150,000. And for the men who served in Vietnam and survived unspeakable horrors, coming home offered its own kind of trauma. Some, like Walk, say that they had invectives hurled their way. Others, like Naval Officer Ford Cole, remember being spit on. As a cohort, Vietnam veterans were met with none of the fanfare and received none of the benefits bestowed upon the World War II greatest generation. The word back there, invectives, one of the things that they refer to as invective is vomit. And I think they're trying to be really nice about it, but basically human matter was bagged and then thrown at these soldiers. There was no welcome home parades for Vietnam vets. It was partly due to the logistics of the never-ending conflict. The Vietnam War lasted from 1964 to 1973, and the longest war in American history until it was overtaken by the one in Afghanistan, still currently going on. And servicemen typically did 1 year tours of duty. Unlike conflicts with massive demobilizations, men came back from Vietnam by themselves, rather than with their units or with their companies. For a decade, as one person was shipped off to fight, another one was returning. The collective emotion of the country was divided, said Jerry Lemke, a Vietnam veteran sociologist and author of The Spitting Image, Myth, Memory, and the Legacy of Vietnam. For the family whose son is just coming back, you aren't going to have a public welcoming home ceremony when somebody's son just down the road was just sent off to Vietnam. It was a revolving door.
Mm-hmm.
So as the war ground on and became increasingly hopeless, the military personnel put through it, this kind of revolving door of service came to represent something many Americans would rather not accept: defeat. Vietnam was a lost war, and it was the first major lost war abroad in American history, Lemke says. You don't have parades for soldiers coming home from a war that they had lost. Another issue, something else that the Vietnam vets faced, was the GI benefits were lacking. Celebrations aside, the government also failed to make good on its promise to those who served. Veterans returning from Vietnam were met with an institutional response marked by indifference. Peter Langjenis, I'm probably butchering that, I'm sorry, Peter, today the commander of VFW Post 653 in New Canaan, Connecticut. He also commanded Delta Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry, 199th, the Light Infantry Brigade from 1969 to 1970. He led his men on operations that lasted 30 days or more in some of Vietnam's most inhospitable conditions, without shaving, bathing, or changing clothes. None of that. He says, this prepared me for the reception at home upon our return. Back in the States, Langenis quickly discovered the GI benefits available for Vietnam veterans were almost non-existent. While living in New York, he developed symptoms of malaria, a tropical disease fairly uncommon in the concrete jungle, yet he was denied VA health care because he didn't display those symptoms in Vietnam. There's a parallel that we still deal with today.
Yeah, we still deal with today.
It's not anything new. That's one of the very first things that one of your raiders at the VA will ask you. Well, how do you know that you got injured when you were in the military? My very first time I ever heard this question, I was kind of blown away, and I even said, because it happened in the military. Duh. That's a sad state of affairs. That not all that much has changed, but the VA has gotten much better. Digressing a little bit here. He was denied VA health care because he didn't display those symptoms in Vietnam. He graduated from Notre Dame prior to being commissioned, and after his service returned to law school to cash in on his educational benefits at a time when I was paying $300 of credit. My entire educational benefit was $126. And when it came to finding a job, he was met with thinly veiled disgust and discrimination from law firms upon learning that he was a Vietnam veteran. The society really was ill-prepared to give these guys what they deserved, said Christian Appy, professor of the history of the University of Massachusetts Amherst and author of 3 books on Vietnam. They were not necessarily looking for a parade, but they were certainly looking for basic human support and help in readjusting to civilian life after this really brutal war. And that's the whole article goes on like this, and it basically explains, like, look, this was the very first time that an entire generation of war veterans was basically dumped on. And they were and a lot of the guys that went to this war, they weren't going willingly. The draft was a huge thing during the Vietnam era. This is not anything that anybody doesn't know, but you were given basically two opportunities here. Is you could go in and be a conscientious objector if you were drafted, but then you'd have to serve jail time. So would you rather go to war or go to jail?
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason was economic. While the economy after World War II was one of the most robust in American history, during and after Vietnam, the nation was in a death spiral of stagflation and economic malaise. And as more and more wartime atrocities came to light, there was a national implication of guilt and shame placed on Vietnam veterans as a participant in a brutal, unsuccessful war. In popular culture, the stereotype of the broken, homeless Vietnam vet began to take hold thanks to films like The Deer Hunter, Coming Home, and First Blood. First Blood, by the way, is a fantastic movie if you really want to kind of get an idea for what goes on in the Vietnam veteran's psyche.
Mm-hmm.
The Gulf War, however, this is where we started to see the shift in attitude. It would take nearly 20 years after the end of the war for the Americans to get right with the Vietnam veterans. The dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in 1982 began the process, but many identify the Gulf War of 1990 and 91 with its national flag-waving, yellow ribbon cultural mobilization and the grand celebrations of successful campaign as ending the Vietnam syndrome. The Vietnam veterans, we couldn't believe it. We could not understand getting letters from school kids, said Longinus, also a veteran of Desert Storm. You couldn't believe that people were cheering for you. Since 9/11, patriotic gestures like wearing flag pins and saying thank you for your service have become common, as more troops are sent into Iraq and Afghanistan, but the specter of Vietnam still lingers, and some of the war's veterans view such acts with a wary glance. Deeds need to be done in addition to words, says Walk, who is 100% disabled from his Vietnam wounds. I appreciate the respect and the thank yous because that was something I never received when I came home. It's better than nothing. It's better than them walking around. It's better than them walking away and not even recognizing you. But what are you going to do in addition to saying thank you?
Yeah, I'm speechless. It's, yeah, I don't know what.
It's embarrassing.
I don't know what to say.
You know, a lot of I get a lot of the thank yous. And I don't mind it. You know, it's certainly not. It's a humbling experience to have somebody say thank you for your service because, I mean, I had to stop and explain this a couple of times in my own head to break this down and say, well, I really didn't do it for you, and so I felt a certain sense of guilt in allowing somebody to say thank you, but then I had to realize they're just trying to be nice and acknowledge that you did something great. And so just shut up and accept it. And so over time, I eventually developed the habit. Okay, when somebody says thank you for your service, you thank them back. And that's it. Because all they're doing is acknowledging that you did something amazing. And I mean, even those guys who've gone overseas, like Bill's one of the guys we have, big bomber Bill Tenike. He's one of those guys. He's pretty modest about his service because Bill was an infantryman, and I wish he was here to tell this. He served in Afghanistan, but he never saw any action, so he didn't get his combat infantry badge, and he feels like his service has kind of somehow been degraded because of that. And I've had to remind him on a couple of different occasions, like, no, Bill, dude, you signed up and you stuck it out all the way through, and that's probably more honorable than anything that you could. And I get it, you didn't see the actual combat side of things. That's fine. Some would say that's a blessing even, but you still have to look at it like you're still a part of the 1% who did something, even if you weren't in fact in the right place in the right time to be called upon. You still did it, and you still served, and you still did it without complaining or bitching. You just went through and you did the thing that you were asked to do. And that's an amazing piece right there. It's knowing that you're a part of this nation's history.
Yeah. Hopefully in 100 years from now, they'll have my name on a wall or something.
Well, I hope that they do, but if they do put your name on, listen, most of the time the guys that get their name on a wall, it's because they had to do something really amazing, really great, and get really messed up. So I hope that the reason that your name goes up on the wall is just because it's OIF and that's it. Don't do anything stupid to get yourself killed, okay?
No, again, while we're talking about this, when people say thank you, I do understand where you're coming from because I was like that too. I had a lot of resentment, like, don't think I didn't do anything for you. I even cursed or whatever, and
Yeah.
now because I've gotten smarter and wiser, I just take it and say, oh, I thank you, I appreciate it, and especially now, when I say I appreciate it, it really means a lot because of our political dividedness that we have now. So it's always grateful to know, no matter, I don't know the person's history who's telling me thank you, but I always say, like, well, either or, if they're left or right, they still went out of their way to recognize of what we have done as a whole together as veterans, regardless of the reason why we served. So
absolutely,
because everyone served for a different reason. Some people did it for just straight up greed. They just want money, or 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 they done it because they were selfish. They thought it was an easier way to jumpstart something. Or some people did it on the opposite end of the spectrum, which was selfless. They wanted to serve because they were selfless. They were like, I want to serve because I want to serve, because I understand the history, and I also understand the call.
Well, it's an interesting concept because you and I served with a guy who was in that boat where he was told, well, you either sign up for the military or we're sending you away. Do you remember that guy?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And he was very, very obviously one of those guys who just didn't want to be there. So that sparks kind of a question in my mind with understanding and acknowledging certain people who are forced into that situation where, well, I just don't want to be here, but I didn't want to go to jail. So that's why I'm here. So let me just do my time and I'll be out of your hair. So with that in mind, Jacob, what made you decide to sign up?
My mentor, Dwayne Conks, he was a retired colonel, and I always wanted to be kind of like that kind of character, because I knew I wasn't, I was heading down the wrong path in life. And when he stepped into my life, it was kind of like that light, that shimmering light in my, that darkness. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna need to do something. And unfortunately, I wanted to join the Air Force, but I just wasn't smart enough. But I met a great guy, my recruiter, Sergeant Phillips, and I always remember him. And I saw that blue cord. I was like, dude, how did you get that? And I saw that Ranger tab, and I was like, and I remember, Jeremy, I'm not lying to you. I looked at, those back in the day, they had those pamphlets of the ranks, and they explained the ranks. My goal was like, oh, before I get out, I want to be that rank. And I remember pointing at an E7 rank, and I was like, it's going to be me.
Yeah.
And then I'll get out. And yeah. So that's what happened, and that's why I served, because I knew I needed it. I needed the growing up.
And it'll do that.
So in a way, it was kind of selfish, because I knew it was a way to develop myself. But and during my time, though, it became selfless, because I've, my first deployment, you start growing that brotherhood. So now it's like, oh, I'm serving because of you, the guy next to me, or I'm serving because of this now. And now I want to keep continuously growing and developing. And so it changed. So yeah. And you?
Well, I'm going to expose my own stupidity here.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. My biggest fear was that I'd end up living in a Kenmore box somewhere outside the city limits or something like that.
Yeah.
And I really had no path in life. And it was my senior year in high school. I skipped a lot. I already had all the credits. I wasn't worried about anything, but I just kept skipping school. And so I actually ended up skipping the second semester and the third semester of my senior year in high school. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what, my parents kind of lit a fire under my butt. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything without an education, yada, yada, yada. And because that was the trope back then is, well, if you're not educated, you won't go anywhere, which we now know is complete BS, but that's a different story. So I kind of okay, maybe I do need to go back. So I went back and I told the school, yeah, I'll if I need to make any extra credits up, I'll do it. It's no big deal. Just let me back in. And of course, it's a public school. They don't have a choice. And they're like, well, great. Here comes this little prick again. But I showed back up right around career day. And the career day thing works. You got to go. You got to sign up for different things that you might be interested in. And of course, I wasn't interested in any of the crap that they were offering. No, I don't want to be an electrical engineer. No, I don't want. What is all this? Professional chef?
It seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, I don't want to learn all this stuff. So I just signed up to go in and visit with the recruiters, because I'm like, there's no way that these guys are going to sucker me into doing anything like this. Well, and so I walk in there, and there's a Marine in one corner, and he's rigid, and he's he's super stiff and he's kind of got this I'm better than you attitude. And the Navy was all but absent. There was no Navy there whatsoever. The Air Force had two guys standing almost directly across, like at the catty corner angle from the Marine. There was two of them, and both of them were pudgy and goofy looking. And then there was the Army recruiter who was wearing his dress blue, or now they were greens at the time, and he just looked like a laid back, chill guy. So I was like, I'm gonna go hang out with that guy, go talk to him a little bit. And wouldn't you know, he got me in that day, hook, line, and sinker. He got me. And he said, what are you going to do? You know, what are you going to do with your life? I'm like, I don't know. He goes, well, why don't you join the Army? I was like, oh, I don't know. Okay, sure, whatever. Like, yeah, right. Like the Army would take me. Well, and then he looked up my ASVAB scores and everything, because we took them in school. And he looked up my ASVAB score. He's like, oh, holy crap. You could do anything you want to. Like, you could get a really good education. You could be like, you could learn logistics. You can go and you could be a mechanic. And I was like,
it seems like a lot of work.
Like, well, yeah, I don't really want to put in that much effort. He's like, well, you could be it. and he told me a little bit about infantry, and you know, they go out in the field a lot. They're out there camping a lot, all that. All right, cool. Well, I'll go talk. We'll talk to somebody. We'll see what goes on. And I mean, that day I went home and talked to my parents, and I was like, what do you think about the Army? And they were like, no, absolutely not. And I said, well, there it is. Now I know what I'm doing with my life, because they said no. And so, but I didn't have the reason. I didn't have the understanding. I didn't know what I was doing, why I was doing it. I just knew that I was doing it. And then we fast forward a couple of months, we're sitting there at, I think it was like a very couple of first days of basic training, and the drill sergeant said, all right, you need to be proud of what you're doing. This is some amazing stuff, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to go around the room, and each one of you dick necks is what he was calling us, was going to tell us, you're going to tell us exactly why you signed up for my Army. You're going to tell me what you're doing here and why you think that you deserve to be here. What's your reason? What's your purpose? And all of a sudden I'm like, I got to come up with an excuse. And the drill sergeant came to me, he's waving the big black bat, and he put it right in my face. He goes, what's your excuse for being here? What good reason do you have for being here? And I said, well, my great uncle, we called him Uncle Benny. My great uncle was in World War II in Korea. And so I want to make my family proud. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, like, I wanted to do something bigger than myself. And so that's my reason. I wanted to do something bigger than me.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. No.
Thanks for your service. So I wanted to talk about one other thing. One other big veteran thing. You know, we live in a really weird, divided time, and everybody seems to hate everybody over everything. We're always divided over, you know, who to vote for, or which policies are right, which policies are wrong, what the government should pay for, all this crap. We're always fighting over stupid things. And we live in a time when it's everywhere. Media is everywhere. You've got everybody expressing their opinion online. Hell, I'm one of them. And one of the big mistakes that we all seem to make is we forget that the other person that we're arguing with is a human.
An American.
And an American at that. September 12th was an amazing day because everybody banded together right after the terrorist attacks. And we lost sight of that real quick. So I want to share a story. This one is also from history.com, because I'm, again, not doing any of the news media stuff. We're going to have some good quality stuff today. So I'm going to share this story with you because this really touched my heart. And I say that with all sincerity. This one, this story is called What Happened When World War I Paused for Christmas. It was Christmas Eve in 1914. In the dank, muddy trenches of the Western Front of the First World War, a remarkable thing happened. It came to be called as the Christmas truce, and it remains one of the most storied and strangest moments of the Great War, or of any war in history. The British machine gunner Bruce Bairnsfather, that's a weird name, later a prominent cartoonist, wrote about it in his memoirs. Like most of the fellow infantrymen of the 1st Battalion of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, say that 5 times fast, he was spending the holiday eve shivering in the muck, trying to keep warm. He had spent a good part of the past few months fighting the Germans, and now, a part of Belgium, he was crouched in a trench that stretched just 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide. His days and nights marked by an endless cycle of sleeplessness and fear, stale biscuits, and cigarettes that were too wet to light. He says, "Here I was in this horrible clay cavity, miles and miles from home, cold, wet through, and covered with mud. There didn't seem to be the slightest chance of leaving, except in an ambulance." Then the singing started. At about 10 p.m., Barnes' father noticed a noise. "I listened," he recalled, "away across the field among the dark shadows beyond. I could hear the murmur of voices." He turned to a fellow soldier in his trench and said, "Do you hear the Germans kicking up that racket over there?" "Yes," the other one replied. "They've been at it for some time." The Germans were singing carols, as it was Christmas Eve. In the darkness, some of the British soldiers began singing back. Suddenly, Barron's father recalled, "We heard a confused shouting from the other side. We all stopped to listen. The shout came again. The voice was from the enemy soldier, speaking in English with a strong German accent. He was saying, 'Come over here.' One of the British sergeants answered, 'You come halfway, I come halfway.' What happened next would stun the world and make history. Enemy soldiers began to climb nervously out of their trenches and to meet in the barbed wire-filled no man's land that separated the armies. Normally, the British and the Germans communicated across no man's land with streaking bullets, with only occasionally gentlemanly allowances to collect the dead unmolested. But now there were handshakes and words of kindness. The soldiers traded songs, tobacco, and wine, joining in a spontaneous holiday party in the cold night. Barron's father could not believe his eyes. Here they were, the actual, practical soldiers of the German army. There was not an atom of hate on either side. And it wasn't confined to that in the one battlefield. Starting on Christmas Eve, small pockets of French, German, Belgian, and British soldiers held impromptu ceasefires across the Western Front, with reports of some of them on the Eastern Front as well. Some accounts suggest a few of these unofficial truces remained in effect for days. For those who participated, it was surely a welcome break from the hell that they had been enduring. When the war had begun just 6 months earlier, most soldiers figured out that it would be over quickly and they'd be home with their families in time for the holidays. Not only would the war drag on for 4 more years, but it would also prove to be the bloodiest conflict ever up to that time. The Industrial Revolution had made it possible for mass-produced new and devastating tools for killing. Among them, fleets of airplanes and guns that could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. And bad news on both sides had left soldiers with plummeting morale. There was a devastating Russian defeat at the Tannenberg in 1914 and the German losses in the Battle of Marne a week later. By the time winter approached in 1914 and the chill set in, the Western Front stretched hundreds of miles. Countless soldiers were living in misery in the trenches on the fronts, while tens of thousands had already died. Then Christmas came. First-hand accounts recalled bottles, smokes, and barbering. Descriptions of the Christmas truce appeared in numerous diaries and letters of the time. One British soldier, a rifleman named J. Reading, wrote a letter home to his wife describing his holiday experience in 1914. Quote, "My company happened to be in the firing line on Christmas Eve, and it was my turn to go into a ruined house and remain there until 6:30 on Christmas morning. During the early part of the morning, the Germans started singing and shouting, all in good English. They shouted out, 'Are you the rifle brigade? Have you spare bottle? If so, we will come halfway, and you come the other half.' Later on in the day, they came towards us," Reading described, "and our chaps went out to meet them. I shook hands with them, and they gave us cigarettes and cigars. We did not fire that day, and everything was so quiet that it seemed like a dream." Another British soldier named John Ferguson recalled it this way: "Here we were laughing and chatting to men whom only a few hours before we were trying to kill." Other diaries and letters describe the German soldiers using candles to light Christmas trees around their trenches. One German infantryman described how a British soldier set up a makeshift barbershop charging Germans only a few cigarettes each for a haircut. Other accounts describe vivid scenes of men helping enemy soldiers collect their dead, of which there was plenty. The soldiers playing soccer in no man's land during the Christmas truce in 1914. There's a picture there for you. I don't know if you can see that, but they called it an impromptu kickabout. One British fighter named Ernie Williams later described in an interview his recollection of some makeshift soccer play on what turned out to be an icy pitch. The ball appeared from nowhere, or the ball appeared from somewhere. I don't know where. They made up some goals, and some fellows went in on goals, and then they just had a general kickabout. I should think that there were a couple of hundred taking part. So, in an era where we had soldiers upon soldiers that were just bloody, killing each other, and I mean, it was a bloody battle. It was a disaster. It was a huge conflict, and during this time, there was a moment where they just said, you know what, let's just come together for a minute, and they did, and they held a peacetime right there in the middle of the battlefield. And we can't even come together in our own country. These are two different types of people, two different
language
countries.
Barrier and everything.
Yeah, stood for totally different things, but they put their
and not just stood for separate things. They fought for different things.
Mm-hmm. And the World War I time frame was a bloody time. It was terrible. Now, I'm going to put this a little bit further in context. There's a little bit more. There's something actually that really stood out to me in this article, and I could read the whole thing because it's heart-wrenching and it's amazing to me, but there's something in here that I want to draw attention to, and this can really wrap this story up in a very strange way that you're not going to expect. But so not everyone was pleased. In fact, there was a lot of people who were very pissed off about this whole thing. Like, you're having a ceasefire in the middle of one of the greatest wars of modern history. What's going on, right? At least one account has survived of a Christmas truce gone bad. The story of Private Percy Huggins, a Briton who was relaxing in no man's land with the enemy when a sniper shot him in the head and killed him and set off more bloodshed. The sergeant who took Huggins' place, hoping to avenge his death, was then himself picked off and killed. In another account, in another account, and this is the big one here, in another account, a German scolded his fellow soldiers during the Christmas truce. Quote, "Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left?" Unquote. That 25-year-old soldier's name was Adolf Hitler.
That's crazy.
So, man, to draw, you can draw parallels. I mean, because everybody's called, like, that's been the big thing, is everybody's been calling everybody Hitler the last couple of years. Like, oh, he's literally Hitler. No, literally Hitler was literally Hitler. Nobody else is literally Hitler. And we live in a world where you don't even know how to get along with your neighbor because you don't talk to them anymore. And you're depressed and you're on freaking 13 different psych drugs because social media is ruining your life. Man, get out and talk to somebody. Just have that conversation with somebody. You might find out, like, you got a whole lot more in common than you think. Or they might be completely off the wall and you don't want anything to do with them. At least you know. I mean, wow. I was blown away by this whole thing when I was reading the whole story, and then it came to that part where it was like the one guy who's really pissed off about this whole thing. It was Adolf Hitler. And it kind of sprung something clear in my head. Like, even my own enemies aren't really my enemies. They're just people who have a different perspective or a different methodology for getting to the same goals. Because really, what do we all really want? We all really want longevity. We all really want, some semblance of peace. We want that safety and security. And that's why you have veterans who go out there and do this damn thing where they do fight. And they do the things that most people either don't want to do or don't have to do or refuse to do, so that you can accept that certain semblance of peace.
That will never happen in the Congress chambers. And it's kind of messed up.
It's a little messed up, but there's a lot of truth to that because, I mean, everybody looks at everybody as if they're an enemy. And listen, it's not true. You and I we were in the Middle East fighting Muslims. Does that mean that every Muslim's our enemy? Obviously not.
Nope.
Not even close. In fact, we had interpreters who were Muslims who, I mean, they'd put themselves right in the middle of the fight and didn't even
They
have
had a greater
weapons.
risk than we did.
Yeah, they had a huge risk. They had to hide their faces. God forbid somebody find out who they were. They'd go and kill their family. We got to leave that.
Yep.
We didn't have to stay behind and try to fight for the safety and the peace and the security of another country. We got rotated out. We got to come back home. We got to go to the VA, and as much as we dog on the VA, at least we got some health care and got the appropriate treatment to get us back into some form of normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
These interpreters, the guys that we fought with, well, they didn't even fight. They had to, if there was a firefight, like they're ducking and hiding behind cover and hoping to God that we can save their lives. But we got to go home. They had to stay there and fight for that.
Yep. And their home was like literally across the street. Or we were in their neighborhood.
You ever remember one of the interpreters? His name was Joseph. It was what we called him. I don't know. I have no idea what his real name was.
No, I remember him.
But the guy was very, very intelligent. He was actually a graduate of the University of Baghdad. And a lot of times I would kind of catch him mumbling to himself. And, he would be sitting there smoking a Miami cigarette and just kind of like mumbling thoughtfully and scratching his chin. And I'd just say, Joseph, what the hell are you doing? Just thinking about what Iraq would be like if it was free.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, then he tried to give me his daughters, and I'm like, no. No.
Well, I think this is a great episode, Jeremy. I appreciate you bringing this up, and I think a lot of veterans will appreciate you having this idea, and hopefully they enjoyed this episode, learning a little history of where Veterans Day came from, and and how even not on this day, but on other days, and how veterans from opposite armies can come together and just take a break for a few hours.
Yeah, the fact that people who 30 seconds before, I mean, if it doesn't restore just a little bit of faith in humanity, the fact that our grandfathers and great grandfathers could stop even for just a second, and despite their differences, come together and say, you know what, let's find our common ground. That's what they did. They found common ground. And if there's any key point or any key takeaway that I want to give, it's that's why most of the veterans that we celebrate on Veterans Day, that's why they did what they did, because they wanted the rest of us to find that common ground, that key point, that key takeaway that brings you together, that helps you to establish some kind of relationship, even if it's with somebody that's your enemy. There is, you really legitimately almost never face your own enemies in this country. And if you think that, Democrat, Republican, Independent, like if you think that those are your enemies, no, those aren't your enemies. Most Democrats, and I dog on Democrats a lot, but most Democrats are not your enemies. In fact, some of them could be your spouse. Your spouse certainly shouldn't be your enemy. The only real enemies that we confront in this country is like legitimate racists, religious fanatics, those Antifa pukes. Those are enemies. Those are legitimate enemies because they've been brainwashed into thinking that they've got some kind of a difficult life or some kind of a weird fake, I don't know what, they live in a weird world. They live in a weird place in their mind. The rest of us, if you really want to honor veterans, this is my advice. If you really want to honor a veteran, come together with your enemy, find some common ground, and get rid of all of the strife. It'll make you feel so much better. That's what I think that's what probably about at least half of the veterans that I know would like to see is some kind of common ground.
Yeah. And normally we end the episode of doing push-ups, but I would like to change it up for today. And for our veterans that listen, just relax and try to find some peace in the world or some piece of frame of mind, and just enjoy it. And if someone says thank you, just be humble enough just to accept it. And for civilians who listen to our podcast, I would say just, take it time out of your day just to appreciate a veteran service. It's pretty much all I have right there.
Especially the Vietnam vet. I still owe a lot to a lot of my Vietnam veteran buddies, but man, every veteran that's ever signed up, that's ever served, that's ever decided to put on the uniform, you have my respect today. I love each and every one of you, even you, Jacob. I love you, man.
Yep. Love you too, man. And all y'all veterans out there, I appreciate your service. Thank you so much. And we love y'all. If y'all ever want to talk, contact us anytime.
Absolutely. Struggle is real. We're here for it.
Yep. Y'all have a good one.
Be blessed.